Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of you joining us from around the world, and welcome to the Crisis Response and Recovery Nature-Based Tourism, Biodiversity and Livelihoods event. My name is Anna Spenceley, and I've been working as a consultant on sustainable tourism for the past 20 years. And I have the privilege of being chair of the Tapas Group, the director of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, and I sit on the advisory board of Travelist. I'm thrilled to have been working alongside the Center of Responsible Travel, Arizona State University, and the World Wildlife Fund to make this event possible. And I wanted to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for being here today. The last 18 months has offered us quite a new reality. And while I would really love to be sitting face to face with you today, I'm really glad that we can gather together in this virtual space. Today, we have 3 different sessions with panelists who are inspiring, engaging, and really paving the pathway for nature-based tourism, biodiversity, and livelihoods. You'll have the opportunity to hear directly from these global experts and listen to their wisdom and experiences. And after each speaker has shared their thoughts, we'll have around 10 minutes for discussion. After the event, we'll be sharing follow-up resources, including the presentations. And in just a few moments, we'll be putting some housekeeping guidance in the chat too. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Kelly Brecker, who will be our facilitator for our first session on visitation, biodiversity conservation, and protected areas in light of COVID-19. Over to you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Anna. Global tourism revenues have been helping to deliver biodiversity conservation and livelihoods for decades. The revenue creates financial incentives to conserve important wildlife populations in the areas where we live, as well as support local communities and economies. The pandemic, however, is dramatically changing all of this, causing systemic shock and with widespread implications. This session engages international experts who will share insights into the impacts of the pandemic on visitation and biodiversity conservation in protected areas. Up first, we get to bring back Dr. Anna Spenceley from the Tapas Group. Take it away, Anna.
Okay, so I've been working for the last 18 months or so on a series of assignments to analyze the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism sector and look at its implications for conservation, livelihoods, and sustainability. And I'd like to share some of what I've learned with you today. These are the 3 topics that I will be speaking about. And we'll start with an overview of the impacts of the pandemic on protected area tourism. In addition to the tragic global impact on human health and lives, the global spread of coronavirus has also brought the tourism industry to a complete standstill by April 2020, and the problem of overtourism disappeared overnight. Protected areas were closed in many countries across the world, and this map shows how much visitation had declined in April last year, with the biggest drops colored in dark purple. The closures had a major impact on the revenues of many protected areas and on the amount of money spent in gateway communities. To illustrate, Tiago Souza found that the 50% reduction in protected area visitation led to an estimated loss of 55,000 permanent or temporary jobs and a drop of 410 million income for staff and businesses. And the World Bank simulated the impact of a complete loss of tourism for 1 month on local economies around protected areas, mimicking a kind of COVID scenario, and demonstrated that poor households living around protected areas, which normally benefit from tourism, have suffered the greatest losses. Last year, I undertook a survey for the EU in order to better understand the impact of the pandemic on wildlife tourism in protected areas. The survey was done globally between April and July last year, and there were sufficient responses from Africa and Latin America to create regional analyses. What I found very interesting was that the survey results from Latin America and Africa were very similar. For example, with regards to the substantial reductions in tourists, including the numbers of customers and changes in booking requests, and also the detrimental impacts on staff and local economies. For example, in Africa, more than half of the 48,000 employees of the operators are recruited locally, meaning within 50 kilometers. But by June last year, most local staff were on reduced wages. More than half of the operators had put their local staff on leave without pay, and nearly half had had to make redundancies too. In response to the challenges, nearly all of the operators implemented measures to mitigate the impacts. For example, in Africa, the majority had offered their customers the option to reschedule their trip or had changed their cancellation and refund policies. However, many had still been forced to close their facilities temporarily, downscale significantly, and 2% had had to close permanently. And remembering that this survey was done early in the pandemic period. Furthermore, the majority of operators in these regions said that environmental crime was one of their most immediate concerns. And compounding this was the likely change in their own payments for environmental services, with a prediction that there would be around a $25 million decline in annual spending amongst the African operators and a drop of 245,000 in Latin America. As a result of the pandemic, some locations have seen upsurges in poaching, and they've been concerned about that the lack of tourists and extra eyes on the ground has contributed to increases in wildlife crime. In other places, though, there have been lower incidents of wildlife crime, perhaps because poachers can't move themselves or the wildlife products around so easily with lockdowns and fewer flights. We're not certain yet what the next outcome will be, and more research will be needed on this. And with a better understanding of the disease and the widespread use of face masks, PCR tests, and vaccines, travel restrictions have eased in many countries. So now we look towards rebuilding the tourism sector. Recognizing the impacts that have taken place during the pandemic and the global challenges that we have with nature, pollution, and climate, many have focused on how to recover more sustainably. Protected areas around the world are reopening gradually and cautiously for different types of tourists and activities that account for COVID conditions. Compared to the map that I showed you earlier, you can see that many more countries are now green rather than purple, indicating increased visitation. And SafariBookings.com has been conducting monthly surveys amongst the hundreds of operators it serves on its platform across Africa. Their research shows the dramatic change that took place from March to April last year and indications of improvement since May 2021. But we see that protected areas are taking vastly different approaches to tourism recovery. For example, in Machu Picchu in Peru, the World Heritage Site reopened after an 8-month closure, but will only permit now 675 visitors a day, which is around 30% of its previous limit. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the government plans to establish a multi-million-dollar infrastructure development, which has local people and UNESCO concerned about the wildlife and local people. Then the Healthy Parks, Healthy People ethos has been around for some time now, promoting the health benefits of natural areas as an ecosystem service. An editorial essay from the World Commission on Protected Areas that was published last year emphasized the importance of protected and conserved areas in sustaining our physical and mental health, particularly under the stress of COVID-19. But in our rush to escape the confines of lockdown and get back outside, there's been a return to overcrowding, particularly where protected area managers haven't been prepared to manage the huge influx of new cohorts of visitors. These visitors have also left waste behind them, including single-use plastics, disposable barbecues, and face masks. And this is something that we'll be discussing in much more detail in the next session. We should also recognize that residents in gateway communities continue to face a dilemma. On one hand, they want to see tourists return so that they can recover their businesses and the jobs supporting tourism. But on the other hand, they're scared that visitors will bring the virus with them. And this is particularly concerning where healthcare facilities in developing countries are limited and where vaccination rollouts have been slow. To help support a sustainable, resilient, and regenerative recovery, there are needs for financial and technical resources. During the EU survey I mentioned, protected area tourism operators in Latin America and Africa were calling for a broad range of support. They were mainly seeking less than $250,000, with the majority seeking grants and around a quarter looking for debt with low interest repayments or flexible repayment terms. And they were also looking for technical advice to help identify new source markets, research new products, and they also wanted to do virtual training. Many countries have developed rescue packages to support their tourism sectors during the crisis, and there have also been a range of international grants and technical support programs too. However, the number of applications to these has by far exceeded the actual value of grant financing available. Some operators and destinations have tried to crowdsource emergency funds with mixed results and generally raising at less than $50,000. To help address this, a collaborative platform has been launched to matchmake between the communities, conservation areas, and safari operators that need funds and those that have it. So far, this initiative has gathered data from around 350 enterprises in 11 Southern African countries where they work. And there are also investment funds from the Nature Conservancy, Conservation International, and the International Finance Corporation that are raising capital as sources of finance for tourism operators in wildlife economies. But in addition to finding funding, we also need to share more knowledge and guidance material and link this with training. For example, we need technical resources that explain how to operate tourism amid COVID and adapt them as scientific understanding of the coronavirus improves. This one was recently released by the EU and is currently available in English and Thai, and with 5 other languages on the way. It shares intergovernmental agency and government guidance on operating tourism amid COVID, with hyperlinked examples of guidance from protected area authorities, and also illustrations of virtual safaris that can be operated until tourism recovers. Furthermore, and with an admittedly shameless plug, the new Handbook for Sustainable Tourism Practitioners provides a workable and rational toolkit for investigating practical challenges of tourism while accounting for modest timeframes and resources. This provides step-by-step guidance from more than 50 international contributors on how to make tourism sustainable, whether through destination planning, making it financially viable, or ensuring communities are fully involved. And I'm pleased to share that Edward Elgar have generously offered a 50% discount on the hardback until the end of November, using this code SPN50. Many institutions and coalitions are pushing for sustainable recovery of the tourism sector, and the energy and drive to do so makes me optimistic for the future. I'd like to thank you very much for your kind attention, and now I'll hand back to Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that informative presentation. Appreciate it. Next, we have Park Dan-gyun from the Korea National Park Service. Welcome, Park.
Hi. Hi, my name is Kang Park. I work in Korea National Park Service. Today, I will present about visitor management in Korea protected area. I would like to introduce the changing characteristic in the Korean society in the wake of COVID. And in accordance with disease change, I will explain the actions of the Korea National Park Service. In this session, I would like to share 3 examples. First, as COVID continues, the number of self-quarantined people has increased dramatically, and their depression has gradually been serious. We provide ASMR videos to help people who are exhausted from prolonged COVID to recover emotional stability. ASMR video is collected by a park ranger using cell phones and audio equipment, after which ASMR videos are serviced after being screened by a video expert. ASMR video is the approximately 50-minute long ASMR videos show landscape and animals, plants, and other natural and cultural resources that represent Korean national parks. We are providing the service through our YouTube channel and making an ASMR mobile app to improve user accessibility. Let's enjoy ASMR videos. We entering our YouTube channel. This video is the sound of beach in Han류해상 National Park. The following video is the bell sound of Hwaumsa Temple located in Ji리산 National Park.
Park, this is Anna. I'm afraid I can't see the video. Are you able to share it on your screen, please?
We can go ahead and share it in the chat. People can check it out. Thank you.
Yes. If you want to see more ASMR videos, visit our YouTube channels. Furthermore, experiments that demonstrate that KNPS ASMR physiologically relieves tensions and anxiety and physiologically increase pleasure and stability. Second, in the aftermath of infectious disease such as COVID, SARS, and MERS, it is clear that people want to visit places where there will be fewer or no other people. We provide a service to show trail congestion information by using real-time data from electronic counters installed at parking entrances. This is a service that classifies the congestion situation of park trails into 3 levels: crowded, normal, and spacious, and provides them in real time through a web page. The congestion calculation method is divided into 3 stages. First, calculate the appropriate number of people for the trail area by dividing the trail area by the minimum required area per person. And the number of people using the trail is counted through an electronic counter. Finally, the congestion level is calculated by dividing the current number of people by the appropriate number of people. So you can see the website in this photo. So click here, you can can you see this web page?
I'm afraid not, but if you can post it into the chat, people will be able to access it later on. Thank you. We just see your slides.
If you entering the website, you can see a map of Korea like this. This one icon represents 1 national parks. The green icons are parks that is being serviced. Gray icons are parks that will be serviced next years. Currently, 8 national parks are in service, and it is planned to expand to 21 national parks next year. This icon is Bukhansan National Parks. It is located in Seoul, the capital of Korea. When you click, you can see the trail congestion information of the Bukhansan National Parks. It's the right photo you can see. This is the name of trail, and you can see the real-time congestion level of trail is displayed in color. Crowded trails are displayed in red, normal trails are shown in yellow, and spacious trails are displayed in green. It is now 8 a.m. Korean time, so most of the trails are spacious. And if you click locations, like these icons, you can see the location of a trail. This service helps visitors to find the dispersed and uninhabited places. This service is launched this week. Third, the number of overseas travelers has decreased by more than 90%, but the demand for overseas travel is still there. What is the first thing you take when go abroad? Yes, your passport. When you enter a foreign country, an immigration officer put an entry stamp on your passport. Based on the concept of passport stamps, we plan to launch the KMPS stamp tour to divert the demand for overseas travel to national parks. To give the feeling of traveling abroad, we designed a passport that introduces 22 parks. In addition, we produce stamps with the characteristic of the park under the theme of wild animals and plants, historic sites, and natural landscape of national parks. Certificates and medals and weapons are given to those who have visited our 22 national parks to boost participation. 1 year after the stamp tour was launched, 80,000 people have participated and 5,000 people have visited 22 national parks. It is the most popular program of ours. It is a KMPS passport. Like a real passport, individual information is written, including a passport number, a nationality, the date of birth, and the expiration date. It gives the feeling of a real passport.
There's 1 minute remaining, please.
To summarize what I presented, we launched new service to keep up with changing social trends after COVID pandemic, ASMR service to help exhausted people recover their emotional stability, dry congestion information service that enables visitors to know the congestion level of stress, and KMPS stamp tour to turn overseas travelers into national parks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Park. It's certainly refreshing to see the amount of technology used to help visitors understand where to go and what experience they'd like to have. So thank you for sharing that. That's quite interesting. Next, we have Dr. Karma Sering from EcoCall Services. Welcome, Karma.
Thank you. Just try to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. It looks great.
Okay, a very good morning from the foothills of the Himalayas, Bhutan. It's very early here, a little past 5. So I'm still yet to fully wake up. First of all, thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share some of my experiences from Bhutan. And as we know, we are going through a very unprecedented time. A lot of dynamics in tourism has changed. Likewise, in Bhutan, we've seen a lot of changes. So I'll just share my experiences on visitor management changes in the protected areas of Bhutan. Sorry. Yeah, the outline of my presentation. Firstly, I'll just give a brief background on tourism development in Bhutan and its impact in the country. Then I'll just touch a little bit on brand Bhutan, and then tourism in the parks of Bhutan and the change in the visitor pattern. And finally, winding up with adapting to the changes and looking at future strategies for visitor management in the parks in Bhutan. Tourism in Bhutan started in the early 1970s with the guiding principle of high value, low impact, or as we say, low volume. This is a very cautious policy we followed. Why? Because the major attractions of tourism in Bhutan is mainly our unique, vibrant culture and the pristine natural environment, two very sensitive attractions to overcrowding in tourism. So we had to choose a very cautious policy. Over the years, through this guiding principle, Bhutan has proven to a large extent that small is big, especially when it comes to low arrivals of tourism. Tourism is one of the highest revenue generators in Bhutan. Our arrivals for 2019, before COVID started, has reached the highest of over 315,000 people, visitors, which is almost half the size of the population. And because of the economic benefits of tourism, it has attracted a lot of tour operators. Like for a small country like Bhutan, there are over 3,000 tour operators, close to 200 hotels, village homestays, guides. It is compulsory to take a guide when you come to Bhutan. And here, Bhutan, we have in 2019, over 4,600 guides, and handicraft shops, also over 300 handicraft shops. So a huge economic impact through tourism, and employment over 50,000 people directly employed by tourism. So what makes Bhutan very special, brand Bhutan? As we know, in any sort of business, branding is so important. So brand Bhutan as a destination, Bhutan has captured the interest of many travelers to a large extent because of the attributes of brand Bhutan, which is basically, as I said earlier, the pristine state of the natural environment, over 72% forest cover, with a constitutional mandate to maintain 60% for all times, out of which we have over 51% of the country under protected area system. And Bhutan is highly applauded for being a carbon negative country. Then a vibrant, unique cultural heritage, mainly based on Buddhism, and a development philosophy based on gross national happiness, as opposed to the gross domestic product pursued by many countries. And lastly, the visionary kings and good governance and good leadership that Bhutan has. All these collectively has branded Bhutan as a very special country. So now getting into parks in Bhutan. This is the map of protected areas in Bhutan, a small country, out of which over half the size of the country falls under the protected area system. It consists of parks and biological corridors. Bhutan has taken a landscape approach to conservation. We have 10 protected areas, but in 1999, the government felt through the initiatives of WWF that the 10 protected areas in isolation is not ecologically viable. So the biological corridors, the ones you see in green, that connects the 10 protected areas, were meant as corridors that can, in the long term, sustain the viability of the wildlife between the protected areas. And as I said, it covers over half the size of the country, the protected areas. And the other special feature of protected areas in Bhutan is that we have local residents living inside the protected areas, and it is the policy of the protected areas and the government to keep having the people as part of the parks in the protected areas. Unlike many countries where I've visited, I've seen where people actually are relocated out of the parks. It becomes a major challenge, and in fact, it becomes a threat to the parks it's in. So Bhutan has pursued a protected areas management based on having local residents inside the national parks. So having them inside the park, we have to pursue park management based on balancing conservation and development. And tourism is one of the key economic benefits for the protected areas in Bhutan. And some of the tourism attractions in the parks of Bhutan are trekking, bird watching, wildlife and botanical tours, cultural tours because of the people and the livelihood within these parks, and then the spiritual and pilgrim tours that we have in these parks and protected areas. And lastly, the hot springs that make it attractive for mainly the domestic visitors to come inside the national parks. Now, just look at the visitor dynamics before COVID and during COVID. Pre-COVID, the maximum visitors that came to the protected areas were all international visitors. And although we have international visitors, in overall, visitors to protected areas is not really big in Bhutan. It only estimated around 10% of total arrivals. 90% of people who come to Bhutan actually travel outside the national parks during cultural tours. And trekking was the major attraction, followed by bird watching for international travelers to Bhutan, to the protected areas in Bhutan. Now during COVID, of course, things have changed. Our doors have closed for international tourism. It took a while for tourism to restart for the protected areas, but in a matter of time, after a few months, there has been a substantial increase in domestic visitors inside the protected areas. And one of the major attractions has been pilgrim and sacred sites, which were the major attractions for domestic tourism within the protected areas. Now, the changes that have occurred in the visitation pattern and the future strategies, first of all, is recognizing the potential from domestic visitors. Prior to 2019, domestic tourism was hardly even thought about. Although there were travelers, few domestic travelers within the country, there are a lot of problems for them to travel because they did not have any tour operators who were focused in catering to domestic tourism. So now there has been a shift in focus by tour operators, developing tours to cater to domestic market. Initially, tour operators catered their tours only for international tourists. During COVID, recognizing the market of domestic tourism, now we have a lot of tour operators who have actually catering tours that suit the domestic market, which has led to a huge increase in domestic market within the protected areas. So when it comes to management in the parks, there's been now aligning visitor management strategies because of the initiation of the domestic tourism. And the Tourism Council of Bhutan, which is the apex tourism management board, they have now initiated even the registration system. And as you see below, there's a Drup Quora, which means Bhutanese Exploring Bhutan. A logo has been made. People who want to travel within the country have to register so that accordingly there can be proper regulations, especially during this COVID time, to ensure it is safe. And in case of any outbreaks, people can be traced and accordingly safety measures can be put in place. So
we have 1 minute left, Karma.
Thank you. The other benefit for domestic tourism is that we promote tourism in parks to instill people's interest for conservation. Until now, we have been doing that mainly through international tourists who come to Bhutan, appreciate Bhutan's conservation efforts and go back to Bhutan. But with domestic tourism, we have people within the country who understand, become more aware of the conservation attractions, and it instills them, influences them and instills interest in them to protect the national heritage of Bhutan through this change in the visitor dynamics. So this is my brief presentation on the changes of tourism pattern in Bhutan, visitor pattern in Bhutan. So thank you very much to all who are listening, and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Karma. We appreciate learning about the visionary qualities of Bhutan, and as well as the adaptations that have been made during COVID. Next up, we have Andy Thompson from the New Zealand Department of Conservation. Welcome, Andy.
Kia ora tātou e hui mai nei, e tēnei rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Andy Thompson. I work for the Department of Conservation in New Zealand. Real pleasure to be with you today. Karma, I've been a huge admirer of Bhutan and your approach to tourism. Congratulations. And Anna, some great trends there in Park. I love your technology on crowding. That's fantastic. I think we're going to see some reoccurring themes today, but I'm going to show you what the impact of COVID has been in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And to be honest, it's given us a huge opportunity to rethink tourism, which is pretty exciting. I am going to just briefly mention some of the images as we go through the presentation. This image is of Aoraki Mount Cook. It's our highest mountain in New Zealand, not high by world standards, certainly not by Bhutan standards. But it's a very spiritual mountain, like many places around the world, and it's also one of our national parks. In fact, it's not too far from where I'm sitting now and is within the region that I work in. And I'm just trying to work out how to scroll
Might
through.
try the lower left corner of the slide, Andy.
Thanks for that tip. That's awesome. In this photo, in these two photos here on this slide, we have Nelson Lakes National Park up at the top of the South Island of New Zealand, and the lovely beach scene is of Abel Tasman National Park. It's actually not too far from Nelson Lakes. Abel Tasman National Parks was one of our national parks that was really struggling with the influx of tourism and the management of tourism there. So today we're going to briefly cover pre-COVID, the impact of COVID and the opportunities that COVID has given us. So the tourism approach in Aotearoa, New Zealand, has been to sustainably manage tourism in relation to Maori principles around hospitality and guardianship, welcoming visitors, but also looking after the land and looking after what we call the whenua, and also looking after the community. It has also been based around a very successful marketing campaign, and Karma, I take your point about brand. New Zealand has done brand very well, and it's led to the growth of a very successful tourism industry, and you can see the statistics there on the right-hand side. It's a big part of our economy. Welcoming visitors is a big part of our culture. We love having people here, but it really had got a little bit out of control. We even had a conservation and visitor levy in place, so when people arrived at the airport, they were contributing to the management of our national parks directly. The photo here is of Tongariro National Park in the central North Island, again, another very spiritual place, and I believe the second national park in the world. So the impact of COVID is we went from 3.9 million visitors. Bear in mind, New Zealand only has about 4.5 million people, down to 0 international visitors, $6 billion hole in the economy. And like many places, the government here made the decision to prop up a number of strategic businesses, iconic businesses in the tourism sector. And like many places in the world, we saw an enormous surge in New Zealanders wanting to get out there and experience their national parks and do their walks. And in fact, we have an online booking system for what we call our 10 great walks. And one of those great walks sold out within 15 minutes, which was more popular than some of our rock concerts. But as I've sort of alluded to, some of our marketing and some of our reality were a little bit different. So quite a few reviews were undertaken prior to COVID and during the COVID space. And it became clear in New Zealand that we were losing the social license to operate large volumes of tourists in our precious national parks. The quote there on the screen is from a Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment who did an independent review on how tourism is being managed. It was right around COVID when it hit, and I can't help but smile at a politician that makes a pretty abrupt statement such as that. So that's given us, in short, the opportunity to rethink and reset tourism. That's been reflected in our tourism strategy, and sorry, I hate talking about strategies during presentations. The key thing I wanted to draw your attention to here, though, is that first of all, at the top of the strategy document is the Department of Conservation's logo. So we were there drawing up the tourism strategy along with the tourism industry, and that's the first time in New Zealand that's happened. And the environment is really being put first. environment and community. And what we're seeing is a genuine change to understanding that tourism is a tool to achieve environmental and society outcomes and economic outcomes. It's not a means and an end in itself. And that's something Bhutan has understood for a long, long time. Finally, we're catching up in New Zealand. So how is that playing out on the ground? I've got 2 case studies, which I'm going to briefly flick through because it's pretty hard work on the ground to change the direction of your tourism industry when you have a whole lot of infrastructure built around that. Milford Sound, Piopiotahi, probably our biggest tourism attraction. It's in Fiordland National Park at the bottom of the South Island. And they're taking quite a ground up approach to looking at things there. There's been, it's had around 1.2 million visitors per annum, and that's been growing rapidly. They're looking to, currently you can drive to Milford Sound. They're looking at ending driving, and there'll be a centralised transport system, carbon neutral, charging visitors based on the value of the place. In New Zealand, you don't pay to get into national parks, but we're looking at some places where we might be able to do that in the future. Prohibiting cruise ships, a good bold move. There's over 100 cruise ships that visit Piopiotahi. Closing down an airport that's in the Sound, because it's one of the first things that you see when you get to the Sound is an airport, and that's not why people come. Introducing new government management structure for the area. At the moment, the management structure for the area is very much based around the tourism industry and not around conservation or Indigenous people. And building a world-class cable car to reach higher elevations. Now, there's a safety reason for that. There is significant earthquake risk in this site, and getting people higher is seen as one way of mitigating impacts. The second area I wanted to touch on is an area that I'm directly responsible for managing. I'm fortunate enough to manage an area called Banks Peninsula in New Zealand. In Banks Peninsula is the stronghold for this amazing little Hector's dolphin. It's a dolphin that's about 1.5 meters in length. You can see it's got a Mickey Mouse shaped ear for its dorsal fin. They're extremely playful little dolphin, but they are unique and they're endemic. And in Akaroa Harbour, it's one of the places, about the only place in the world where you can go out in a boat and you will see dolphin. There's no question about that. It's just a matter of when and where you'll see them. So it's quite unique. There's quite a tourism industry built around that. Due to the 2010 Canterbury earthquakes, we saw a shift in the cruise boat market from Christchurch, Littleton Harbour, over to Akaroa Harbour. And we went from having a few cruise ships in Akaroa Harbour to suddenly having 91 cruise ships per annum. It's quite a shallow harbour, it's not huge. And the effect of those cruise ships is where they can't, they have to moor, so they can't berth, means that they've got their thrusters on the whole time and they are producing noise. There is speed
1 minute
impact.
left, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you. Speed impact from boats and also damage to the sea floor. Post-COVID, there's no cruise ships, they've all gone away. And we're down to about 20 trips to view dolphins per annum by the local tourism operators. My final slide shows the results of a long-term study where we've actually been able to track how dolphins use the harbour, and the picture up the top, or the graph heat map up the top there, shows how dolphins are moving further and further out of the harbour. That's a huge concern to us. Pushing, a rare animal out of its habitat is something that has to be taken significantly. We think the cruise ships, as well as the tourism industry, as well as the recreation boaties, have had a part to play there, and we've got to make some big changes because of that. So I've been working with the tourism operators directly to bring about some of those changes. And finally, I'm just saying kia ora. I've got a picture of a moorpork owl there. And the mōpō gal there is to keep an eye on things, because these are challenging situations and great opportunities, but we need to keep an eye on things. Kia ora.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for your insights and the implications of the pandemic on visitation in protected areas across the world. And it's really fascinating, Andy, to hear that some parks have become more popular than rock concerts in New Zealand, and great to see that technologies and approaches being used in Korea and Bhutan. So we've had a couple of questions already in the Q&A, and we'll dive into those now. So I'd like, yep, great, I can see the panel. Awesome. So a couple of questions have already been answered in the Q&A. And now there's a question for Park in Korea, please. And the question is, what type of geospatial platform was used to develop the trail congestion observation system in Korean national parks? Thank you. If you could unmute and answer, please. Park and Minsun, could you unmute, please? Did you hear the question? Okay.
So Anna, could you repeat the question once again?
Certainly. The question is, and you can see it in the Q&A chat if you have that open too. The question is, what type of geospatial platform was used to develop the trail congestion observation system in the Korean national parks?
I understand you question about the area and trail area. We can have a 우리가 이제 우리가 그 면적이 이미 계산돼 있어요. 그걸 가지고 면적은 이미 우리가 그 계산된 면적 가지고 있다. 단방로 면적에 대한 거는 이미 우리가 계산돼서 가지고 있다.
So Anna, so we already have the data for the area of the each trails in the national parks, and then we are using this data to divide. We are using this data to calculate the density level of the trail.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. Next, we have a question for Karma. And the question is, what is the best way to encourage community participation in protected area tourism in Bhutan?
Sorry, first I got to unmute myself. Yeah, what's the best way to encourage community participation? As I said earlier in my presentation, Bhutan's got to pursue a protected area management based on conservation and development, because we have people living inside. So one of the best ways to pursue community participation is one of the fundamental aspects of conservation, that is pursuing an incentive-based conservation. There has to be incentives for communities to support conservation. For travelers, yes, there's an incentive. They are attracted to the sites, attractions there, so they travel. But for the residents, they got to have incentives to participate in tourism. So for them, yes, the benefits that come from tourism. So in Bhutan, the benefits that come from tourism for communities, it's basically a lot of to do with trail management, the visitor management, catering to their services, pitching their tents, carrying their luggage, portering services, village homestays. People are able to offer their houses, turn it into village homestays. And these are the ways that give them economic benefits. So yeah, many of the incentives are based on services. But unlike maybe some other countries that have advanced in, we do not have village people who are actually local expert guides. The government is trying their best to train local guides to participate within the travels, to tell their stories. So those are areas which are still, which could be tapped. But as of now, most of the services are all catering towards accommodation, food, and transport, pottery. Yeah. Thank you. I hope that has helped.
That's great. Thank you very much, Karma. I'm going to go next. We have a question for Andy, which are, what do you think are the biggest menaces for the protected areas in New Zealand, and how is tourism confronting these problems?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Our biggest menaces in New Zealand are invasive weeds and pests, by far dwarf any other issue that we deal with. And unfortunately, we spend most of our time as rangers trying to deal with those invasive weeds and pests. We have a unique movement in New Zealand called Predator Free 2050. So we're aiming to have the whole community, tourism industries all on board with helping us achieve that approach. And we're seeing some remarkable changes. And we know that when we remove the pests, we get amazing spring back with our biodiversity. So the tourism industry is definitely in their boots and all as part of that. And the real rhetoric around tourism in New Zealand at the moment is a word that Anna used in her presentation. It's all around regenerative tourism. So yeah, expect a lot more in that space. I see there's another question there around price elasticity and market testing for international visitors. That's another really good question. And I think what happened is pretty much there've been a lot of studies and a lot of indications that people were willing to pay, but hadn't been a lot of action until about 3 or 4 years ago. And at that time, two things happened. We were able to put in place the conservation levy at the border, which meant that international visitors paid a set amount of money when they came into the country. And that went to local government and also to the Department of Conservation to fund infrastructure to manage tourism pressures. And the other thing that happened is with our Great Walks product, we just implemented a price change. We gave about 12 months notice and just did it. And there really hasn't been any complaints at all. So if you're a Kiwi, you can get it for one price. And if you're an international visitor, you get it for another price. And the demand is still strong because the product is so good.
Thank you very much, Andy, for doing two questions at the same time. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to check. We've got a lot of questions in the chat, but we've probably got time for one, maybe two for everybody. There's a question from Mariana Altricia. She says to everyone, you mentioned that national tourism has increased during the post-COVID period. Are you expecting that international tourism will return, or are you depending on national tourism for the future? So maybe we can go in turn. Parker Minson, would you like to respond? And then we'll go to Karma and then to Andy.
우리가 봤을 때는 이제 코로나가 끝나면 해외 관광객들이 많이 증가할 거라고 예상하고 있습니다. 저희 이제 국내 트렌드, 코로나 이후에 국내 트렌드 조사한 결과에 따르면 해외 관광에 대한 국내인들의 그런 해외 여행에 대한 수요는 여전히 높은 걸로 보이고요. 이처럼 이제 다른 나라 사람들도 해외 여행에 대한 지금 수요는 여전히 높을 걸로 보고 있습니다.
So I will help the interpretation of what Mr. Pakanen said just now. So we are expecting that there are the huge needs from of the increase of the international travel after the post-COVID-19. So during early of this year, we had a research on the change of the visitor trend. Then we are expecting that there are lots of there will be increase of the international tourism after COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Karma, would you like to respond briefly? Thank you.
Sorry, Anna, could you repeat the question? I was busy answering a question on chat for somebody. Sorry about that, yeah.
No problem. The question was about whether you think that Bhutan will continue to use domestic travel in the future, or whether you think international travel will rebound.
I'm sure it'll take a while for international tourism to rebound. But yes, the lessons learned during this COVID, there's been advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages, as I said, domestic tourism will be, I'm sure the tour operators, there are few tour operators who have been influenced and they feel there's a market. And I'm definitely sure that domestic market will pick up, even if things normalize after COVID.
Thank you, Karma.
Thank you.
And Andy, would you like to respond? Thank you.
Crystal ball gazing, isn't it? It's a dangerous occupation at the moment. I agree with Karma. I think his comments are really sound there. It's going to take a while for some of the remoter areas, locations like Bhutan, like New Zealand, to see international visitors back. Certainly Kiwis are loving traveling their own country, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a similar situation here in Papua New Guinea as well. Okay, so we are 3 minutes to hour, so we're actually going to have to wrap up now. So thanks everyone for the fantastic questions and our wonderful panel of speakers. We do have more questions into the Q&A, but do not worry, they will not be lost. We will move them into an online document and we'll be able to respond to those as well. So now that we are out of time, we're going to move to our next session, which will be on the resurgence of overtourism in protected areas in crisis. And this will follow up on some of the issues we've been discussing here, and it will be facilitated by Jim Sano. You can stay on this Zoom link for the next session. Thank you, everyone. Hi, Jim. I think we can start the next session. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome to our 5th session on how the recovery is playing out in some of our most iconic protected areas. One of the things that we are observing, or have observed actually, is that when at the onset of the pandemic, the majority of the travelers, especially with tour operators, they postponed their trips versus they canceled their trips. And so they were waiting on the sidelines, ready to go. And as the pandemic has eased in some destinations, so has the reappearance of over-tourism, especially fueled by domestic travelers. And so what the pandemic has also created is a systemic and market-based opportunity for protected area managers, communities, the travel industry, its massive supply chain to achieve the mission of and recalibrate tactics to protect natural and cultural resources, provide quality visitor experiences, and benefit local communities. Today, we are honored to have a panel of experts who provide their insights on the challenges and opportunities to affect meaningful long-term change. And so first we have Dr. Martha Honey, the Director for Responsible Travel Consulting. Over to you, Martha.
Thank you very much. Let me just pull up my PowerPoint, I hope. Great. So I'm going to speak about, in the few minutes I have, the look at overtourism with a focus on the U.S. national park system. And the central argument is that the U.S. national parks have proved to be highly susceptible to overtourism, both before, during, and after, or as we begin to emerge from the pandemic. But at the same time, I think I would argue that the National Park Service is also better equipped than other types of destinations, many other types of destinations, to effectively deal with overtourism. So there is this kind of dichotomy of, yes, it is vulnerable, but it also seems to have the capacity to and the tools to deal with overtourism. This grows out of a book that I was privileged to edit along with Kelsey Frankiel, who is the program manager at CREST. And the book was just published in May of this year by Island Press, which is a U.S. leading publisher on sustainability and the environment. And the book itself includes overview essays for the chapters by leading travel writers, and then about 24 case studies from around the world of overtourism. So what is overtourism, at least as we define it? It's more than just simply overcrowding. It is an excess of tourism that causes degradation to the environment and quality of life. And it is often due, at least in part, to poor management or a lack of governance. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen a confluence of a number of short and long-term factors that have come together to create a kind of perfect storm that has led to overtourism. These include the continuing growth in the number of travelers, both domestic and international, cheap airlines, the growth of the cruise industry and of Airbnbs, and an explosion of social media tools, among other factors. In looking at which places are affected by overtourism, it's certainly not everywhere in the world, and the impact has been uneven. But in doing our book, we identified 5 different types of destinations that seem particularly vulnerable to overtourism: parks and protected areas, beaches and coastal communities, historic cities, World Heritage sites, and some national and regional destinations. In terms of the causes of overtourism in national parks, particularly the U.S. national parks, one of the factors is that the visitation to the park has jumped 40% just in the last decade, from 287 million up to 327 million in 2019. And the reasons for overtourism include a number of factors: the close proximity of many parks to urban areas, affordability, the ease of access, increase in international visitors to our national parks, and a tremendous growth of social media that have in particular included Instagram posts, bucket lists, and selfies that are promoting particular parks or particular parts of parks, what we can call sort of the marquee parks, places like Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, Zion, Yosemite, Rocky Mountain, and Acadia, all of which have experienced up until 2019 increasing numbers of visitors. And this has led to what can be called greenlock or gridlock in natural areas. In terms of tackling over tourism, we saw the national park system actually begin to do so well before the pandemic. The number of visitors to the parks, as I said, had jumped, and they began applying various techniques. They have well-developed strategies within the park system, the US park system being the oldest in the world, over a century old. And so their management systems are well-hewned and well-developed, and they were able to develop tools for over-tourism to use in many of the parks. One of the tools used is known as the Visitor Use Management System, and this includes kind of the 3 E's of using education, engineering, and enforcement. By engineering, that means helping travelers in planning trips via new websites, signage, and digital platforms, through advanced reservations, and also to help steer visitors to less crowded parks. In terms of engineering, this involved new, improved, or redesigned roads, parking areas, shuttle services, park entrances, and visitor centers. In Yellowstone, for instance, one of the park entrances developed a fast lane for those with park passes, modeled after the Easy Pass system used on highways in this country. And the third, E, enforcement, involved tools such as reservation systems, managed access, permitting, and visitor caps. So all of these tools were being put into place, were in the works, and efforts were underway before the pandemic to try to address over-tourism in our national parks. But with the pandemic, of course, we went literally overnight from over-tourism to no tourism. And one of the phenomena that we saw in the national parks here, and of course other places around the world, was that wildlife came out of the hills and down onto roads that had once been occupied by tourists and by traffic and were now empty. And they even wandered, in some cases, outside the park into gateway communities. And in the marine protected areas and sanctuaries in this country, we also received reports of the waters being much clearer. The increase seemed to be an increase in fish, in wildlife, in turtles, in birds. But all of this kind of Garden of Eden moment in many of the parks, proved to be very short-lived. It just didn't last very long. And instead, what we've seen is a return, as tourism has returned, not the way it was before, but with a new normal. It has come back with new demands, new desires on the part of the travelers, and also some new realities in terms of the destinations. And this has affected the national parks in terms of the types of destinations that are most likely to see a reemergence of over-tourism. I would say in this country, we're seeing it most in the national parks and also in beaches. And national parks, because they are easy to drive to, outdoors, healthy settings, small groups, and social distancing is possible. So all of this has led to, unfortunately, a resurgence of over-tourism in a number of the parks. And at the same time, the national parks do have the capacity, as I was outlining earlier, to continue to develop tools to deal with over-tourism. And this is what they have done. They sort of picked up where they were before the pandemic and have begun to use some of the same tools to address over-tourism. According to Donald Ledbetter, who is the tourism head for the National Park System, he says that the VUM tools of education, engineering, and enforcement that were used pre-pandemic are now being used post-pandemic for trying to deal with over-tourism. So the general framework for how to deal with over-tourism has remained largely the same, but there is a much stronger emphasis, of course, on public health in terms of what they're doing. And there also is a stronger emphasis on giving lots of local leeway to the parks to do what they feel needs to be done at the local level, at the park level. For instance, what we've seen is in the Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, they have for the first time are using timed entry permit systems and also advanced reservations for campsites and other facilities. And in Yellowstone, they've developed a 3-phase COVID-19 reopening plan in close consultation with the surrounding communities, and also with a strong emphasis on the health conditions and meeting the health demands.
There's 1 minute left,
so
please, Martha.
Okay, thank you. So what we've seen is that we're continuing to see in the national parks a kind of dual effort going on. One is to address, one is two realities going on. One is the reality of continuing over-tourism, but also the reality that the parks are in a good position to try to address, better than a lot of other institutions, to try to address over-tourism because they have strong public support, because they have guaranteed funding from the US Congress, and because they have a long history of management. That's it. Thank you very much. And now I think we're going to turn it over to John Kelly, who's going to talk about One National Park, Acadia in Maine.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martha. And yes, we're going to have next up is John Kelly, who is a management assistant for Acadia National Park, one of the iconic parks that Martha mentioned that is in the northeastern part of the US in the state of Maine. So over to you, John.
Okay, I'm not able to share my screen yet. I got it now. Thanks. I trust everyone can see that.
Yes, that's great. Thanks, John.
Great, thank you. Just like to say good evening and thank you for this opportunity to participate in this important discussion. As was mentioned, there are very high levels of visitation at Acadia, been a critical issue for a number of years. The resurgence of visitation due to COVID has only exacerbated this growing issue. Tonight, I want to focus on actually a success story, a particular visitor use management tool that has been executed this year very well in the face of over-tourism. And to start, I just would like to also just give you a little background and context for Acadia National Park. As was mentioned, the park is located in the northeastern part of the United States. It's on the Atlantic coast in the state of Maine. And notably, it is within a day's drive of more than 50 million people, a mostly urban population. So this has been a huge driver for people in urban areas seeking out recreation in the outdoors away from urban areas and being only a day's drive from Acadia National Park. The park system was established in 1916. There are 423 units across every state and territory, covers 85 million acres. And in 2019, which was the next highest visitation for the Park Service, we had 328 million visits. Acadia, like other parks, is part of the national park system that includes a diverse array of natural, cultural, and recreational resources that embody the heritage of the United States. From Yellowstone, pictured here, the first national park in the world in 1872, with 2 million acres, to the incredibly small Evers Home National Monument in Alabama, which was established in 2020 to commemorate the lives of 2 prominent civil rights leaders. So we have a great diversity, and Acadia is a part of that. Acadia was also, like the national park system, established in 1916. It was the first national park in the East, which is notable. It's also the first national park that was developed from private land and not previously owned federal land. It contains about 50,000 acres and protects beautiful shorelines, lakes, wetlands, and granite-top mountains. Acadia consists of more than 100 coastal islands in the Schoodic Peninsula on the mainland. But the heart of the park is on Mount Desert Island, where 90% of the visitation occurs. So an already small park has a very high concentration of visitation in a very small area. The park is made up of fee lands shown in purple on the map and conservation easements. I'm sorry, the conservation easements shown in purple and the fee lands shown in green, and they stretch nearly 50 miles across the coast of Maine. Visitors access and enjoy the park from a number of networks. We have 136 miles of hiking trails, 45 miles of non-motorized carriage roads that are primarily used by cyclists, and 36 miles of historic motor roads, which is sort of the crux of the visitor experience here and the source of much of the congestion and traffic issues that we have. The park is not only highly visited, but it is one of the smallest national parks in the country and is typically ranked in the top 10 of most visited. But if you look in this chart here, you'll see that it's actually one of the most densely visited parks, which again is another part of our challenges in managing visitors in a very small location. As of September, year to date this year, our visitation is 63% over 2020, which is understandable because of the low visitation in 2020. But still, 2021 is still 16% higher than 2019. So that's telling us that we are, as others have mentioned, are at an extremely high level of over-tourism in the United States, especially at Acadia. And notably, we're on record to break 4 million visits this year by the time we get through 2021, which is more than 500,000 more visits than we saw in 2018. This trend, though, has been going on for many years. Between 2008, 2018, we saw a growth of 70% in visitation. And while there had been some dips, we continue to see that trend continue. And this has caused us to look forward and look at when and where visits occur. Not only do we have high visitation in a small amount of area, but they're also concentrated. About 75% of our visitation occurs between July and October every year. In response to this, and this was started in 2015 when we began a transportation plan that was a comprehensive look at managing visitor vehicle traffic and parking congestion to improve the visitor experience and protect park resources. The plan proposed a range of management activities that, as Martha described, the 3 E's. And we have been using all of these tools to manage visitors throughout the park. But I also want to focus on one area in particular. Cadillac Mountain is the iconic location in the park. While the transportation covers other parts of the park, Cadillac Mountain is really a great example of where we are rationing visitor access using that 3rd E through a vehicle reservation system. It's the most popular destination in the park, and it's a 3-mile road that travels 1,500 to a 1,500-foot summit, which is the tallest point on the East Coast, and is a road that is narrow, windy, and historic in construction from 1932. Today, all vehicles, except for RVs and cars with trailers, are allowed, which provides an opportunity for people to visit, but also a challenge on what is a historic, narrow road. At the summit, there are 150 parking spaces, along with a gift shop and restrooms. And the summit also offers a number of opportunities for people to enjoy a beautiful panoramic view of the Maine coast. They have interpretive panels and a half-mile paved walk that takes people around the summit. So while visitors have a good experience on foot once they reach the summit, getting there in the past has been another story. And I'll just run through some slides that show you the impact of vehicles rather than pedestrians or cyclists on the park traffic. And these congestion issues are not only an unpleasant experience for visitors, but they also pose safety issues when vehicles can't access, emergency vehicles, park ranger vehicles cannot get through to a potential emergency on the top. The most popular times are sunrise and sunset, which in the darkness at either end of the day poses additional issues. So this is just a sample of what Cadillac Mountain looked like prior to this year. We also had conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians, bikes and vehicles. Over parking caused people to park anywhere they can outside of the designated spaces, which increased erosion, damaged vegetation, and in some cases, people's efforts to park outside of a designated area created some interesting safety issues for themselves. Cadillac Summit Road was under a vehicle reservation system in 2021. It included the entire 3-mile road, and it was intended to address severe road congestion, overparking while improving the visitor experience and safety. Vehicle reservation system was run from May through October. Everything was available online. There were timed entry without a requirement to leave the area. And each reservation was validated by a QR code scanned either on someone's phone or through a printed printout. The reservations were communicated on the recreation.gov website. They had additional information on our park website through news media and social media posts. We
There's 1 minute remaining, John. Thank you.
Developed a pamphlet distributed by the Park Service and tourism partners and road signs for people approaching. We also had to deal with new infrastructure and staffing and being able to scan reservations along the way. So in the end, our reservations were very successful. We sold 200,000 or 85% of them. We reduced, compared to 2013 baseline numbers, we reduced visitation from 534,000 to 488, and the number of cars in one day peaks from 2,400 to 1,700. We got very good reviews on the rec.gov website, and some lessons to be learned is to set reasonable expectations for systems like this, not to expect perfection, be adaptable to changing circumstances, and offer visitors alternative experience if they can't get a reservation. And most importantly, communicate broadly, early, and continually. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And next we have Professor Amran Hamza from the University Technology in Malaysia. So over to you, Amran.
Thank you, and good morning from my part of the world. My topic is regarding domestic over-tourism patterns in Asia or Asia protected areas, and I would like, please, Maddie, to help me with the slides. Next, please. So I will talk about the pre-pandemic or tourism in the pre-pandemic and now the post-pandemic, and in between, I will stress a bit more on what is called the social construct or social construction of nature that has influenced tourist behavior in protected areas in Asia. Next, please. Thank you, Martha, for giving the definition of over-tourism, and it is certainly beyond just numbers, and it is also common in Asia, especially in marine protected areas. You can see that they have all very vulnerable. Southeast Asia is very popular for island coastal tourism, and the common problems like improperly treated sewage and the depletion of marine ecosystems, and also the problems of overcrowding, congestion, and irresponsible tourist behavior is common across the region. So next, please. This has led to even temporary closures. I think the very famous Koh Phi or Phi Phi Islands, where they filmed the beach starring the very young Leonardo DiCaprio then was filmed, and Boracay Island in Philippines had to be closed for several months. And this was before the pandemic. I do not know what is the situation now, but I think the pandemic has given them a more breathing space. But it is, I believe, it's just only the tip of the iceberg, because all over Southeast Asia, many marine protected areas are on the verge or at the tipping points of the over-tourism. And there have been attempts in the past of using carrying capacity, whether or not it is not using the right tool, or whether or not they are not focusing on real issues. That is another problem. Next, please. So this is also a common phenomenon in many protected areas in Asia, in which sustainable tourism is usually, you can see it in the form of a thin end of the wedge. This is Royal Bloom State Park, which aspires to be inscribed in the World Heritage List next year. And this is one boat which is taking tourists. And now, you know, as more tourists come in, and the government felt that they needed to provide infrastructure. So next, rather than build a solid infrastructure, there's a temporary pontoons will do it. But again, it is doing the same, causing the same impact and bringing more tourists to the very narrow passages leading to the hinterland, leading to the more, what do you call this, dense forest. So this is common all over PAs in Asia. Next, please. The technique of carrying capacity has also been widely used in visitor management, but mainly he has focused more on the coming up with a magic number and eventually not knowing what to do with the numbers in terms of management strategies. This is on Sipadan Island, among the top 5 diving sites in the world. Next, please. But if you look at closely, maybe we have been focusing too much. 120 divers are allowed on Sipadan, not based on any scientific evidence. It's just based on the National Security Council's decision, because this is a very geopolitically sensitive area in between Malaysia, Sabah, and the Philippines. But you look at closely, it is the swimsuits worn by the same 6 divers that appeared in the previous slide, and those very colorful, garish batik diving suits. I don't know how the marine life would react, you know, to this kind of, I think, men behaving, or women also behaving badly. So this is the issue about carrying capacity that is not used effectively. Next, please. I would like now to go into my focus on my presentation, which is about the social construction of nature. And I think I've been looking at this. I don't have time to go into detail of the past work, but it's just to, maybe I'm oversimplifying and saying that, you know, the social construction of nature, especially towards protected areas in Malaysia, when the first national park was established in the 1939, it was all about the usual with solitude, wilderness, being close to nature. But then when the government built, you know, access road directly to the park and bringing in influx of domestic tourists, and then our research showed that the social construction has changed. Taman Negara now is being looked upon as a giant playground for families. And repeatedly we get these answers that, oh, this is a very nice place to have fun with family and friends. And instead of the flora and fauna of the trails that need to be explored, domestic tourists were happy just, you know, going along the canopy walk and swimming with the mahseer fish, feeding the fish. And this has been the popular attractions now at Taman Negara. Next, please. So another protected area, the one I showed before, Royal Bloom State Park. I've done a lot of work here, and you can see there's a contrast of the kind of social construction of nature. International tourists whom we interviewed say that they were interested in the artificial flower, wildlife watching, the nature trails, but domestic tourists, almost 90% of them, they were there because they love to be on the boats, right? Fishing and merriments with friends and family. And that photograph of that houseboat now, there are loads of them on Tasik Kenya, and this is the kind of domestic holidays that you stay 3 days, 2 nights, or up to a week, having fun, merriments, fishing, and nothing to do about appreciating nature, wilderness, and so on. Next, please. So I quickly want to also refer to the work I did. It was IUCN sponsored research almost 10 years ago on the Asian philosophy of protected areas. And just to quickly, the salient point is that we do have a very Asian philosophy of harmony between humans and nature, and the natural areas are believed to be just the manifestations of cultural and spiritual values. If you look at the diagram on the right, and that is the first national park, World Heritage in China, and even the pagoda is allowed by UNESCO because according to the Taoist philosophy, this is a bad area in terms of natural area, and to provide a balance, essence or teji, this is allowed. And this is the difference between how the philosophy of protected areas from the Western perspective and the Asian perspective. Next, please. And because of this philosophy, next, you can see that calligraphy, please go ahead. Sorry. Calligraphy everywhere. It is calligraphy in caves to celebrate the prose of poets. But then when I've been to many of the nature reserves in China, I can see that this could have been used as a form of license for Disneyfication. And then, neon lights and even elevators have been used. So I have to rush now quickly. Next, please. So you can see that through this, I think, exploitation of the philosophy, you have seen that a lot of incompatible users being introduced. And during the pandemic, there have been a lot of surveys being done, and most of the Asian tourists said, yeah, we will change our behavior. But what happened after that is just the same, revenge tourism. Next, please. I just try to finish one or two slides. And this is the irresponsible tourist behavior that is common in Asia now. Next. And so what we are trying to do is really a very, very huge challenge, how to change the social construction of nature, which requires not only the 3 E's, education, engineering, and enforcement, but the engineering will involve social engineering. So next, please. And this is a project sponsored by UNDP. We're trying to increase the depth of the ecotourism experience through this non-consumptive wildlife tourism, so that we want to change the whole branding of Royal Bloom State Park for the industry players, for the tourism players too. Next, please. And finally, let me just conclude that this has been on the left, the traditional roles of PAs in Asia. But now, since all these changes to the tourism behavior, probably we should put public enjoyment as number 2 after conservation. So next final slide is just to say that there's a lot of work to be done. We have been doing it in the post-COVID landscape, especially now to look at how we can focus on the social construction of nature among domestic tourists in Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hamza. And next we welcome Dr. Bill Borey, an associate professor at Deakin University. And so over to you, Dr. Borey.
And thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. I'm going to reinforce some of the themes that Anna, John, and Martha introduced and expand on visitor use management. The psychological and the physical effects of lockdowns and other interventions in this time of a pandemic, they've been well documented. And one of the clear ways that people have coped and will cope is to seek out and spend quality time in the outdoors. They're the safe places, the safer places. It's a chance to escape from confinement, sanctuary, relief. It's somewhere to feel free and whole. And we're clearly seeing folks are wanting to bond with their family and friends, as well as maintain social distance. Here in Australia, parks were the first places to gather. We needed access to these places. And the local communities are proud and eager to invite visitors back. They urgently seek out the opportunities to restart their businesses and put out the welcome mat. And so it's important that we protect the very qualities that make these protected areas so very important and meaningful today. Our mandate is twofold: to preserve the qualities that make it special and valuable, because that's part of our identity and our heritage. It's part of what makes us us, but also to provide opportunities to use and enjoy them, to learn, to appreciate, to explore. These places are much more than just fun and games. They've always been a mechanism, a place for improving the quality of our lives and of our communities. The benefits of parks and recreation are very well documented. This chart is adapted by John Schultes in 2003, based on the benefits-based management work of Bev Driver and Don Bruns. It's a comprehensive listing of the benefits of sustainable tourism and recreation. And I like this moniker, healthy parks, healthy people. These are the places in which we heal. Let me introduce one of the fundamental ideas of visitor use management. That is that we don't so much want a homogenized, low common denominator, bland set of conditions. It's important to realize that one place can't and shouldn't provide for the full range of tourists. Instead, we should acknowledge and supply a diversity of opportunities. Each park, each location providing a consistent and coordinated set of conditions. This is the ROS, the Recreation Opportunity Spectrum, where conditions range from the primitive, highly natural, low levels of use, low levels of regulation, to the urban, highly modified, high levels of interaction and high levels of service provision, with a number of places in between. And in this way, the special character of each place is recognized and protected. So the visitor use management framework, it is a planning framework, a proactive, not reactive process for identifying what we want to protect and provide and preserve. Initially published by the National Park Service in 2016, but it's a product of the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council, the 5 main public land and water management agencies in the United States. 6 steps in the visitor use management framework, and they reflect the approach that has been taken in the management of outdoor recreation and sustainable tourism over 30 years through frameworks such as the limits of acceptable change. First step is the explicit identification and statement of what is being protected. These are the goals, the objectives of sustainable tourism management. And the objectives are taken from law and government policy. That is, what's the legislated mandate? For what specific purposes was the area dedicated? What specific values? For example, the so-called Eastern Wilderness Areas Act of 1975 states the specific values of solitude, physical and mental challenge, scientific study, inspiration, and primitive recreation. Second step is identification of the desired conditions. We need to give specifics of the ecological conditions, not just preservation of the environment. We need to give specifics of the visitor experience, not just count numbers of visitors. And we need to give specifics of what sorts of managerial conditions we want, not just levels of financing, but the degree of development and infrastructure. There's no one ideal set of conditions. We just need to be stating consistently and coordinated what we are striving for. Third step is the identification of indicators. These translate those desired conditions into measurable attributes so that we can track them over time. Indicators are not the quality itself, but they're a sign. They're an indicator. Think of them like a canary in a coal mine. The desired conditions are healthy air, and the canary's behavior tells us about the level of air quality. Fourth step is identification of thresholds or standards. These are the minimally acceptable levels of each indicator, the limits of acceptable change. Thresholds are not ideal or target conditions, but they're markers of when the conditions are out of standard. For instance, we don't accept that the canary is dead. That's an unacceptable level of air quality. Think of thresholds as guardrails. We want to stay away from them. We don't want to be bumping up against them. Visitor Use Management Framework also sets up triggers, where the indicator prompts a management response well before the threshold is reached. And that action helps prevent or reverse the decline in conditions. Visitor Use Management Framework then has us identifying the management strategies that will maintain those desired conditions. Managers and planners need to think in advance how they're going to be prepared to act. And I would add that many argue that limiting use should be a strategy of last resort. Instead, the 3 E's, the 3 sets of strategies, should all be used first. Lastly is monitoring of the desired conditions, using the indicators, asking what's going to be measured and why, where is it going to be measured, who's going to do the measurement, how often are the measurements going to be taken, and what sorts of analysis will be required and who's going to do it. Monitoring is such a big part of the Visitor Use Management Framework. There's a whole guidebook on monitoring. So, Visitor Use Management Framework, it is the current and best professional practice for sustainable outdoor recreation and tourism. And I'd suggest while today's situation is challenging, the need for such a forward-thinking framework is more urgent than ever. I go through the framework because it is a product of a lot of good thinking and application over decades. And I'm concerned that decisions being made in the context of recovery from COVID will be less thoughtful and less based on theory and research, and not done for the benefit of maintaining quality and sustainable tourism experiences. If you'd like to read more, you can download the guide for free and perhaps read our chapter in the Handbook of Sustainable Tourism. Thanks, and I think we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was really excellent. And I'd like to thank all the speakers. Thank you, Martha, John, and Amran as well, for your insights into the resurgence of overtourism in protected areas and crisis recovery. It was really fascinating to hear about the application of the Visitor Use Management Framework and the 3 E's as a practical tool to address overtourism in recovery. And to think, for the first time, I think, Amran, about the impacts of colourful diving suits on fish in coral reefs. I will be careful about my fins in future. Thank you. So we have some really great audience questions, which we're going to dive into, and we'll take as many as we can. So first of all, I'd like to take a question from Jordan Khan, who says that in developing countries, especially in the Caribbean, we've been moving away from sun, sea and sand tourism to nature-based tourism, which is seen as a new economic product to exploit. But it's resulted in over-tourism on our small islands with a major impact. How can conservation organizations work with customers to stop this before the public and private sector to catch up with really implementing sustainable tourism systems? So open the floor. Who would like to respond? Martha, would you like to have a go at this one?
Yeah, so the question is that overtourism is being caused by nature-based tourism, by ecotourism, is that right?
It says that it is taking place in the small islands. So the question is really about how conservation organizations can work with tourists to stop this, to make sustainable tourism systems take place.
Well, I think it also needs to be with the government, because the government, the Park Service also needs to be involved in terms of, really taking something like the VUM concept and trying to figure out what kind of limits need to be in controls and what kind of, traffic and building, everything. You need to have a master plan. You need to have a plan for how to address this. But I think you can't leave out government. They've got to be involved as well.
Thank you, Martha. Would anyone else like to dive into this one?
I would like to mention that the challenge is that there's so much out of our control for messaging and communications with social media.
Mm-hmm.
And as Martha had mentioned before, the challenge is we can communicate through all these channels and use our tourism partners, the Office of Tourism, and all of these resources, but still the more powerful message is coming from someone's Facebook post or Instagram post.
Yeah.
And that gets exasperated.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes there can be a conflict between one agency saying, please come to our area, and others saying, no, we actually have enough, thank you. We need to manage them differently.
Or what social media is saying, putting out Instagram and Facebook and so on, versus what the Park Service may be trying to say. And I think that's your point, John, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would like to add by saying that I think we should also focus on how do we curb greenwashing, because greenwashing now, I think governments also seem to think that greenwashing means sustainable tourism, and it is not, so how do you educate governments also that this difference between what is sustainable tourism and what is greenwashing?
Yes.
It's not just about the huge numbers that we saw. We saw very different behaviors from people who really didn't know what a national park was about. And so it wasn't just as people mentioned, not just the enormous amount of numbers, but it's also the behaviors and the education cycle for a park like Acadia, where we have a lot of repeat visitors who, gradually learn over time, was lost on many, many new visitors, first-time visitors.
And these new visitors were people who were, they were just had wanted to get out in nature after being pent up because of the pandemic for so long.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to move to another question. Thank you, which comes from Christopher. He says that overtourism has a negative impact on biodiversity, and he's seen some park authorities increase entrance fees to help regulate the numbers of tourists as a mitigation strategy. So he asks, apart from the visitor use management program framework, what are other commendable strategies which maybe don't affect park revenue to mitigate overtourism's impact on biodiversity? Thank you.
Well, Acadia National Park does charge an entrance fee, as do another 100 or so parks across the system, but it's not intended as a disincentive to visit. A 7-day vehicle pass for a carload of people is $30 for Acadia. So what we've confronted the issue with more onerous, one of those E's is to actually limit through reservations the number of vehicles that can enter Acadia Cadillac Summit Road at any one time, because all the other tools we were using were not effective.
And I would add that I think that there is an underlying current in Christoph's question, which is, as local communities have become dependent on these revenue streams and management agencies have become dependent on these revenue streams, the pressure to maintain or to increase those revenue streams go up. There are a number of approaches to allocating use. And certainly using differential fee structures is one way of encouraging or discouraging people. But there is an equity question of who can afford the fees, and therefore who is being encouraged and who is being discouraged.
Thank you.
I think
It's
that's a
very
really
important
good
point, Bill.
Yes, very important
Particularly
point.
in developing countries.
Yeah, I think.
I would
Sorry.
please go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I also support the view that pricing has got to be related to any form of carrying capacity threshold limit. And in developing countries, we use carrying capacity or limits of settable change without looking into the pricing structure. Once you do that, you can increase yield and reduce volume. But at the same time, do you create an elitist park? So I think that's also the conflicts.
A lot of feedback that we got, because we charge a $6 fee for each vehicle reservation, and it wasn't necessarily the $6 fee, but it was the I guess entitlement or sense that no one should be paying anything to enter a national park. So there's more of a philosophical issue there than a hindrance to enter.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Martha, did you
I
want
would.
to add?
I just wanted to add that this is a really important question. I think, and the equity question. I think that for parks, it is totally reasonable to charge foreign visitors a lot more than locals pay, and that you should have a tiered structure with school kids and others who don't have means being allowed into getting into the parks free or very, very cheaply. But I think it is totally appropriate to have foreign visitors who've traveled a long way to get there pay, what in the scheme of things is not going to be very much, $100 or whatever, to get into to make use of the parks, because they're not paying with their taxes. They're not supporting the parks in any other way. And so I think that one of the challenges is trying to keep it accessible for locals, but uses the revenue stream, the foreign visitors who are coming, because they're not going to not go to a park after coming all this way. If it's, $30 or $100 as opposed to $3, they will pay.
My
Thank you,
reaction
Martha.
to that, Martha, is very localized because Acadia is 2 hours from Canada. So the local businesses would be absolutely opposed with dissuading Canadians when the Canadian dollar is good, business is good in Bar Harbor. So that's the other side of that issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to try and take one more question before we close, if I may. And there's a lot of questions, so it's hard to select. But there is one regarding local communities. They ask, how does over-tourism impact on local communities and residents who live in or adjacent to national parks? And are there any current tools to mitigate those social impacts? If anyone would like to comment. And Amran, I know you've done a lot of work on social impacts of tourism.
Yeah, when over-tourism comes to a stage that you have to close the park for a period of time, and you can feel, then you can see that the resentment from local communities will increase. So again, how do you find that balance in trying to manage visitors without causing the detrimental impact on the local communities? But also, I think we must allow the local communities to be part of the mainstream. I think what our work now is they're trying to train the Aborigines in some of our national parks to be able to compete with the mainstream travel operators, because they have been marginalized so far. They've been working for them, but it's a huge challenge. And I think over-tourism will either disrupt their income or, will not allow them to be part of the mainstream tourism.
Thank you, Amran. Would anyone else like to comment on local communities?
Well, it's a love-hate relationship here. I'm both a Park Service employee, of course, but also a resident of the town. And while it's great for business, many locals are kept away from using and visiting their downtown because it has reached a point where it's just beyond anything people want to deal with just to go food shopping or have a dinner out. And so it does push out residents from really enjoying their own town.
I think one of the really interesting things we saw during COVID was as local people were starting to rediscover their own destinations and saying, actually, we quite like it with fewer people around, and like reclaiming their own spaces. And I think people are going to become more vocal in destinations about areas that they feel very close to. So thank you. We're going to move now to close for the next session. So I'd like to thank all of you very much for your really fantastic presentations, this really interesting discussion. We are going to move on to our next session, which is on sustainable tourism blueprints and solutions. Please, panelists, if you have the time, please stay with us for the session. And if you're able to answer more of the questions in the chat, as you say, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. For those of you who are participating, you can stay on this Zoom link and there will be a brief interlude while we get ready for the next session. Thank you all very much. Hello, and welcome to our final session in this event. Our planet, as you've realized, I'm sure, is at a really critical crossroads. We're simultaneously facing climate and biodiversity and pollution crises, and with tourism's destinations, host communities bearing the brunt of the impacts. In this session, global thought leaders will share their proactive blueprints and solutions for sustainable tourism, and we'll discuss how we can combat these challenges together. Up first, we have Kelly Bricker, who's professor and director of Havnane, Arizona State University Joint Tourism College. Take it away, please, Kelly.
Thank you, Anna. Certainly, it's a pleasure to be here and to be a part of this event today. I am going to try and share my screen. Maddie, I think, well, no, let's give that a go. Are we all set?
That looks great, Kelly.
Excellent. So as part of this wonderful group, the Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group, we have been doing some work during the time of COVID and trying to get an understanding of some of the needs of protected area managers. We have ideas, and certainly through these last few hours, we've learned even more about some of the needs happening at the protected area level. We decided as a group, the Biodiversity Working Group combined with the Capacity Building Group, to actually talk to, via survey, some of our protected area managers. So one of my goals today is to give a little bit of background on the results, but we don't have them all done yet, but we have a little bit to share. And then just to talk about the TAPA's working group and how you all might want to get involved. So brief over of our study and some of the resources we have here. To give a background, we received 231 responses on our survey, and we had 49 different countries represented, and really A to Z, Albania to Zambia. So we were pretty excited about that. We had a variety of protected area types represented in our survey, from government agencies to shared governance situations such as conservancies, as Judy discussed earlier today, private nature reserves, indigenous or local communities, and others that we will decode at a later time. We also really realized that the protected area managers that did respond were quite educated. And they had a variety of responsibilities that they took on. Some were evolving due to COVID, some were changing due to increased tourism, from sort of biodiversity responsibilities to visitor management. So they were kind of in transition. And as we noted, about 33% attended one or more short training courses. Only 17% actually had on-the-job training on site. 17% attended online webinars. We hope to have some of them here today. 20% attended one or more extensive training courses, and 13% had different types of courses that we will decode at a later time. I think an important note here is what kind of trainings that they had that were relevant, and how relevant were they? Well, some said that they actually contributed to the technical and scientific understanding of their protected area. Some said they were only somewhat relevant, and some aspects were now important to them by default due to new emerging responsibilities. And some of the lessons shared between protected area managers have been some of the most valuable and instructive ideas that they were able to garner from perhaps webinars or on-site trainings. And they all felt sort of collectively that trainings were incredibly important, and they need to be ongoing with the various situations training, the various situations changing over time. So another little bit of analysis that we've done so far is to really look at what are some of the critical issues that they felt were most important, and really what kinds of access did they have to the information of these critical area issues. So I haven't pulled them all because we just simply don't have time, but I did pull kind of some interesting ideas. Distribution maps of major plant species. The majority felt that these were critically important, and the majority felt that they had relatively low access to this information. Similarly, with the distribution maps of major wildlife species, again, 64% felt that they were critically important, yet 54% felt like they had very low access to this type of information. And location of endangered wildlife species so that they could manage visitors around these areas. Again, 72% felt that this was critically important, yet 53% felt that they had very low access to this type of information. And locations of endangered plant species, a similar response. So what we're starting to learn is areas where there may be a dearth of information, and how the TAPAS group might, and others working in these areas, might develop strategies to help our protected area managers. So that leads me into who we are as a TAPAS group. We're an IUCN, we're part of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, and we're a specialist group, and we're all volunteers doing voluntary technical work. And what we do as a unit is really contribute to the knowledge base. So there are several resources that can be accessed, and we're sharing those locations in our information sheet that you'll be getting later, but several resources from understanding visitor use and visitor use management to understanding best cases of how to work with communities. So a variety of resources in this area. There's really a network of over 600 volunteers committed to this intersection between sustainable tourism and protected area management globally. We produce and disseminate this knowledge through some of our most recent work, and some of it goes through the IUCN, others come out in academic publications or webinar series such as this one that you're all participating in today. The target audience for much of this work has been really professionals working on this intersection between tourism and protected areas. And this includes administrators, managers, the whole list of planners and government agencies, non-governmental organizations, community groups, private land managers, private land owners, indigenous groups, just about everybody involved that could be involved in this intersection. And building on two previous editions on the subject of tourism and the IUCN Best Practice Guidelines series, this visitor management use guideline work has provided guidance to key issues to really help managers achieve sustainable tourism in protected areas. And we see this as a changing, moving target, as you've heard in the presentation. So we hope to be updating this and really build this community going forward. So in the end, we help to build capacity through workshops and webinars such as these, and through MOOCs on topics that have been really significant to COVID-19 and protected area management and visitor impacts such as overtourism. And of course, this webinar will be available to all to use and distribute widely as you see fit. And here are some of the ways that you can contact and connect with Tapas. And I just like to personally invite everyone to be a part of this amazing network. We are constantly learning and we're constantly looking at new ways to help you in the work that you do and to help all of us create a more sustainable world, as well as more sustainable tourism as a tool for conservation in protected areas. So back over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelly, for sharing this really important research that you've done, and also for plugging the TAPAS group. And yes, I hope lots of people take the opportunity to join. I'm afraid we've just learned that Jeremy Sampson will be unable to join us for this session. So instead, we'd like to move Natalie Kidd up the agenda to speak. Natalie is the Chief People and Purpose Officer at Intrepid Travel. Welcome, Natalie.
Great. Thank you very much, Anna. Great. Hopefully you can hear me and see my screen now.
Yes.
So as Anna said, I'm Natalie Kidd. I'm the Chief People and Purpose Officer at Intrepid Travel, which means I'm responsible for our global sustainability initiatives, which are the centerpiece of our brand and our strategy. There's something that we embed throughout our business and really keep front of mind in everything that we do. And I'm here today to, I guess, give you a business perspective on how we try and embed sustainable tourism, and not just within our own business, but take a position of leadership and advocacy within the industry to bring other businesses along with us. For those of you who might not be familiar with Intrepid, we were founded over 30 years ago with our head office in Melbourne, Australia, and are now proud to call ourselves the world's largest purpose-led adventure travel company. We are truly a global team with our own Intrepid staff and team members in more than 30 countries around the world. We operate our own tours because we have our own staff and our own tour leaders on the ground in many destinations. And of course, that's supplemented by our sales and marketing officers around the world. Prior to COVID-19 bringing the industry to an abrupt halt, at Intrepid, we operated over 2,500 itineraries across 130 countries on all 7 continents. And we call our style of product sustainable, experience-rich travel. Our purpose as a business is to inspire, create, share, and lead the best travel experiences ever for both people and the planet. Our business absolutely relies on destinations and the communities within those destinations. So for us, looking after them is critical to the ongoing longevity and success of our business. And the thing that really unites our staff all around the world is being able to create positive change through the joy of travel. This is a mission that it attracts, retains, and absolutely engages our staff and our leaders, and indeed our customers as well. So we are a certified B Corp, and for Intrepid being a B Corporation, that means we are legally required through our business constitution to balance purpose and profit and take into account the needs of all stakeholders in our decision making. B Corp is the certification that we use as a way to show the world that we actually do what we say we do. But we also use it to hold us accountable and to challenge us to keep improving and to keep looking for new ways to engage our stakeholders and make sure we're doing the right thing by all of those stakeholders beyond just our shareholders. We don't want to be the best travel company in the world. We want to be the best travel company for the world. But the journey with purpose, which is what we call sustainability, it's not a new journey, and it's been going on indeed since the company was founded over 30 years ago. Our founders really wanted to ensure that we travelled responsibly and that we gave back to communities in our host destinations. Now, of course, things change and we learn over time. So indeed, there might have been things that we would have done in the past that we wouldn't do anymore, but it's an ongoing journey of learning and improving and in trying to make a positive impact wherever we go. So a few examples, I mean, we are really proud to often have been able to take the lead in adopting and advocating on important issues, from starting our own philanthropic foundation back in 2002, the Intrepid Foundation. Since then, we have raised over $11 million that we've been able to distribute to not-for-profits and social impacts around the world. And we started our climate journey back in 2006, becoming carbon neutral in 2010, and earlier this year becoming the first travel company to actually have approved science-based targets. And over the years, we've advocated on many issues, from animal welfare, child protection, Indigenous rights, and gender equality. But Intrepid Travel ultimately is a privately owned for-profit business. But unlike many businesses that I talk to, we don't see sustainability and purpose as a cost on the business. We firmly believe that doing good is good for business. And we've got financial results that demonstrate that. From 2016 to 2019, the 4 years prior to COVID, we invested more in purpose-led initiatives than ever before. At the same time, our results showed that we achieved record top line and bottom line growth. So we don't think investing in purpose or investing in sustainability is mutually exclusive with running a for-profit business. We actually feel that they really reinforce each other. And we absolutely know that what we do in this space drives the engagement of our team members, and engaged team members in turn resonate with our customers. Now, not every business can immediately replicate the resource that we invest into this space, but it's also about taking the first steps and continuing to drive incremental positive change and embedding it in everything that you do over time. But we also have the knowledge that doing good on our own is not going to solve many of the problems facing our world and our industry. So we absolutely embrace collaboration. And I think this is also a key outcome that we saw at COP26 very recently, that collaboration is key. As a business, we look at the issues that are facing our industry, we advocate for them and help bring other businesses along on the journey with us. A recent example that we've advocated on is something that very much crippled our whole industry. We looked at the impacts of COVID and what would it take for us to get back to business, and for all those communities around the world that have been negatively impacted by loss of their livelihoods. So we could see that the positive role of vaccinations was really enabling our source markets to start thinking that the time was right to go back to travel. However, we were also aware that in our destinations, many of them just did not have access to vaccinations, thus potentially putting them at risk if tourism restarted. So for many destinations, they were stuck. They really needed to restart tourism for that economic benefit that they were missing, but they didn't, still don't necessarily have that access to vaccines. So we started an advocacy campaign to call for vaccine equity. As a business ourselves, looking internally, we looked at operationally how we could make a difference, and have indeed tried to do a number of things in different countries as opportunities present themselves. One example was actually getting medical care and vaccinations to communities in Peru where our porters would come from, so that they had the opportunity to get vaccinated before they went back to work when the Inca Trail reopened. We also, through the Intrepid Foundation, partnered with UNICEF's Give the World a Shot campaign, raising money for COVAX and vaccine equity. And I'm pleased to say that in just the last couple of months, we're now very close to our target of $150,000 for this very important campaign. However, as terrible as COVID has been for our business, there is a far greater threat to our industry in the world, and of course that is climate change. Now, I was hoping that Jeremy was going to talk about some of the work that has been done recently, and we have partnered with a number of organisations on climate change and looking at what action is needed. Ourselves as a business, as I mentioned, we started back in 2006 talking about the future impacts. In 2010, we became carbon neutral, but we now know it's very clear that offsetting emissions on its own is not enough. We will certainly continue to do that, but we really need to be reducing our emissions. And so therefore, for us as a business, we committed to getting science-based targets, which were approved earlier this year. We have also really partnered, we signed up very early on to Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency, and we have worked very closely with them and with a number of other partner organisations through the world to bring the industry along on this journey, which has culminated in the Glasgow Declaration, which was signed last week at COP26, which is encouraging all organisations to come on board and commit to serious climate action over the next number of years. For us at Intrepid, we have a number of measures that we are taking. Every one of our offices around the world has its own carbon action plan, which identifies ways to reduce waste, ways to cut emissions. We're actively looking to transfer to renewable energy wherever possible, and we've recently achieved that in Turkey. Initially, there was the feeling that in some of the places we have offices, it just wouldn't be possible, but we're starting to challenge ourselves and prove that it is possible. On our trips, we're also looking at how we not only offset, but reduce our emissions, while also, of course, maintaining a positive customer enjoyment. A few examples, we're looking at all of our flights. Every flight that's under 90 minutes, we're looking for alternatives. Can we take the flights out and find another way of getting around? Our product development now has greenhouse gas emissions as one of the core considerations. So we're actively avoiding bringing in new products that have higher than necessary emissions. We're also putting a much larger focus on the types of products that are more cycling-based or walking-based, thus avoiding unnecessary transportation as well. During COVID, like many tour operators, we had to pivot to domestic and local travel. Now that international travel is reopening, we've decided it's really important to maintain that also as another way of protecting and taking action against emissions so that our customers have the opportunity to also travel closer to home, be that in North America, Australia, the UK or Europe. We're looking at giving them options so that they can reduce long distance flying on every holiday they take and incorporate more local travel into their travel planning. So these are just a few of the practical steps we're taking internally. However, beyond our own steps, we also really want to enable other businesses to come on this journey with us. And we do that by things like contributing to these global partnerships, such as Tourism Declares and now Glasgow Declaration. But we also look at how we can share our own learnings. In the past, we've released toolkits on things like animal welfare, child protection, and now we have released an open source guide for tour operators on how to set science-based targets and start looking at the carbon measurement. So it really is the story of everything we've done, and co-authored by a member of my team, Dr. Susanna Etty, who's our environmental specialist. But she also spends time talking it through and working with anybody who's interested to look at how it can apply to their businesses. So in this way, we combine our own actions with also helping other businesses. A key focus for us moving into 2022 will be looking at both the environmental and social of how we can support and help our supply chains move forward in a number of these different issues as well. So in closing, we really see that our role is combined internal and external. Internally, it's absolutely about identifying and taking actions, but externally, it's also about engaging and advocating within the industry, with our customers. We heard earlier about the impact that tourist behaviour has, and so we aim to, as much as we're taking our customers on a holiday, we're also educating them about the world and about different ways we can make a positive impact rather than a negative impact. I'm pleased to say as a business, I've really seen over the last number of years that we have managed to embed purpose absolutely across the business. And that's why I took you through our vision and our mission to show you that it is really at every level of the organisation. It is integrated in and inseparable from the way that we do business. But in addition to taking that action, it's very much about bringing people on the journey with us, be that our staff, our tour leaders, our customers, or even our competitors. We all need to really work together in order to make positive change. So thank you for your time, and Anna, I'll head back and pass back to you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. It's really fascinating to learn more about Intrepid's comprehensive and also collaborative approach to sustainable tourism and the climate emergency. And I'd like to congratulate you for your really commendable efforts to encourage vaccination in the destinations where you work. Last, and certainly not least, I'd really like to warmly welcome Dr. Susana Calderas-Diaz. She's the co-director of the Institute of Applied Ecology at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. Welcome, Susana.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, and hello, everybody. I am really glad to be here and to share some exciting news that we have to share with you tonight. I will be talking about a very interesting motion on tourism, on sustainable tourism, that we at the university through the Institute of Applied Ecology help move on and to present in the IUCN Congress in Marseille that was last September. This motion was prepared and worked through the TAPAS group that already Kelly and Anna have talked to you about. And the TAPAS group is part of the World Commission on Protected Areas of the IUCN. The presentation I will be showing you today has been also put together with Professor Yu-Fai Long from North Carolina State University in the US, and also Shane Fayers of the University of Florida. So we have put this together for you and to tell you about this motion. So for starting, this was called Motion 130, and the name of the motion is Strengthening Sustainable Tourism's Role in Biodiversity Conservation and Community Resilience. So as I was telling you before, this motion was initially prepared, and it basically started as a dream within the Tapas group, and it was presented at the IUCN conference. Usually you have to present these motions at the IUCN Congress through a primary sponsor that we decided to collaborate as a primary sponsor in this very important motion. And also it was backup, and also a part of the motion were 16 other organizations that are part of the IUCN, that are members of the IUCN. So it was a very interesting motion that got the support from many other organizations around the world. So we have organizations from Africa, from Europe, from Galapagos, from other organizations that are globally based, for example, the Nature Conservancy, Wildlife Conservation Society, WWF, Conservation International. So it was a very interesting collaboration through many organizations to put this motion and to present it formally during the General Assembly of the IUCN Congress in France this year. So what made this motion to start, right, to begin? It was a general awareness, especially within and also an important and an interest within the Tapas group to make this topic of tourism more visible within the IUCN and all the groups that are working in the IUCN, but also having to strengthen, to emphasize the idea of the role of tourism in biodiversity conservation, in protected areas, in all the sustainable livelihoods around the world, right? So through all these events that we have had this morning and this afternoon, we have been talking about how sustainable tourism, nature-based tourism has been very important for local communities and for protected areas. So it's making making more emphasis on the role of tourism. Also, we have tourism as a very important and crucial conservation tool, right? But we need more attention on it, more attention and more recognition by the global conservation community. Usually, in the past congresses of the IUCN, even though there are some topics related to tourism, it hasn't been shown or presented as a key theme in the global conservation discourse. So really, through this motion, what we wanted is to put more emphasis in tourism and all the important role that it's having in the local communities and protected areas. And also, as a background, in the previous World Conservation Conference in Hawaii in 2016, there was already a resolution 6.06 that was promoting, right, improving standards in ecotourism. However, it was we needed more attention. We need to have more impacts on practice, and that's why this motion on tourism started and was presented. Also, it was very important to mention that we have some important drivers, right, for moving on into this motion. Some of these have to be to the efforts in the last years to work on to develop and disseminate global best practices on tourism, visitor management, and sustainable tourism in protected areas. Well, Anna here, Kelly, you five have been working on all these important tools and documents for promoting best practices on tourism and sustainable tourism in protected areas. So there is all this movement, right, to make this important topic to be more discussed and to be implemented in practice. So also we had before COVID, before the pandemic, we had in some protected areas issues related to over-tourism. There were some signals that things were going out of hand, right? Especially in certain places. So these concerns were starting to be part of the discussion, and especially in protected areas in some World Heritage sites, and also was saying we need to discuss more about tourism, the future of tourism, how we are going to be managing this. But also COVID COVID also present a lot of vulnerabilities about tourism. In the past talks, we have heard already all these impacts, how the local communities around protected areas have been dealing with these impacts of COVID-19 pandemic related to loss of revenues, all these impacts in the local economies and the community well-beings. And other impacts related to illegal poaching, illegal wildlife trade, things that happened because of the pandemic. Also, the control of monitoring was decreasing. So all of these make us think again about the importance of tourism, how we need to really include this as a very important topic in the conservation agenda. So that's why we presented this motion in the Congress. I just wanted to show you the voting results for the motion. It was a motion that actually was approved with a very high votes for both. We have in the IUCN 2 categories of organizations. Category A is governmental organizations, and category B and C are other private and NGOs, other type of organizations, right? So for both types of organization, the approval was very important, right? And the motion passed, and this was a very interesting and important news for all of us, because at the end, what we wanted is to work in a collaborative way for moving this topic as a higher level. So just to show you some, as a summary, the most important parts of the motion, what the motion is calling for. So in terms of the IUCN, in general, was to include formally this topic of sustainable tourism, right? And also to integrate it formally in the future congresses, right? Also, within IUCN, there are many different commissions. And the idea is that tourism is a transversal topic, right? So it is important to consider the creation of an intercommission within the commissions to discuss and also to focus on sustainable tourism. That is this topic that goes beyond just one commission. So that's another important call of the motion. Another thing we have within the TAPAS group, there is a specific also task force within the Commission of Protected Areas. There is a specific COVID task force, right? So the idea is to collaborate with the specialist groups and other task forces to promote actions, to strengthen actions to rescue, recovery, and rebuilding of local communities after all the pandemic that all of us passed through the last year and a half. So this includes thinking about equitable benefit sharing programs, and in protected areas mainly this involves tourism in many different ways. Nature-based tourism, tourism that is local-based, that is equitable share. So that these type of programs are very important to have more focus. Also to be thinking about emergency strategies, right, for both communities and protected areas, and also developing resources for these local nature-based tourism programs and recreational activities. So these are the main core ideas and the calls for the motion. And also we have a specific calls for the IUCN members. So these IUCN members, as I was telling you before, are these organizations that are part of the IUCN, and the idea is that through the motion, we increase the support for the development of many different activities that are related to the motion of sustainable tourism, right? Is try to develop more diversified sustainable livelihood activities. We already have heard, and also we know that the communities that were impacted by tourism, one of the things that was the main conclusions of the main lessons learned is that needs to have diversified alternatives for not being so impacted to issues with tourism that we just had because of the pandemic. So also the development of skill training programs, trying to think about alternative markets, right, that create this resilience at the community level. Also, we would like the members also to help establish partnerships, right? Enterprise-based collaborations or partnerships to help with this biodiversity monitoring and also other type of support across the tourism supply chain. And also we would like to members also to help establish more financial campaigns, endowment funds. We have been talking about all these type of solutions and alternatives, but to formally promote these as part of the member agenda. So we have some more operational schedule for the next terms, and we have also been thinking about how we are going to be moving forward with the motion. So there is a motion task force, and we have been trying to specify very clearly how we are going to be working in the short term, in the medium term, and also in the long term. So at the beginning, we are, now that the motion is approved, and all of us are very enthusiastic about that, is starting with announcing to start working together with all the sponsors of the motion and to confirm, right, commitments. I will tell you a little bit more about the commitments that we have been having as sponsors of the motion. And also we want to try to have a very consistent way on how we report and we move and we show progress with the motion. We also want
Susanna, 1 minute, please.
Okay, sure. Then we want to, in the medium term, we want to create these interagency commissions, these other topics that I was telling you about. And also then in the long term is working more on strategic partnerships and funding also mechanisms that help move these ideas of these implementation actions in the real practice in the local communities and protected areas. So we are right now, all the sponsors of this motion right now, the main ideas that we have as commitments are training and capacity building, developing and supporting local nature-based tourism initiatives, having tourism multidisciplinary research and monitoring in the places where we are based, and also exchanging knowledge and experiences. We really want to work as a network and collaborate to move on with these ideas of the motion. And it goes beyond us. So the idea is also to have more people being engaged in these, more organizations, because for having impact with the motion, we need more long-term collaboration and networking. So that was it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Susanna. We really appreciate your sharing such a great overview of Motion 130 and its importance, and particularly thank you for your essential leadership of the submission as its primary sponsor. I think it's an important achievement and really look forward to collaborating with you, co-sponsors and others who want to get involved. Now I'm going to hand over to Greg Miller, our co-host. He's kindly offered to share some of what Jeremy would have presented, and then he'll move us into the Q&A. Thank you, Greg.
Okay, hi everybody. Maddie was kind enough to share me what Jeremy had in the slide deck. I just looked at it, so I want to share a couple points since we have at Crest been working very closely with the Travel Foundation on this. Maddie, if you'd go to the next slide, please. One thing I want to underscore is that Crest is one of the 6 co-founders together with the Travel Foundation and 4 other nonprofits in the creation of the Future of Tourism Coalition. And one of the things that we have been striving since early 2020 is to ensure that tourism is a catalyst for positive change, looking both global and local, looking at both vulnerable systems and valued, and looking at both public and private. Next slide. I won't take too long here. I think many of you have seen this before. Those are the 6 organizations that we have formed the Future of Tourism Coalition. We have established our 13 guiding principles, where we have today about 685 signatories to these guiding principles. I'm sure several are on here, and if you want more information, I think Maddie just put the Future of Tourism website in the in the chat. What I believe Jeremy would want to share in this is a couple of things. One is that climate change is one of our guiding principles. The other is the number one in terms of seeing the whole picture. And I think this is particularly important for us in this conversation of looking at a more holistic approach to sustainability and protected area management, putting the community and destination at the center of the future of tourism, and to ensure that we are developing the kind of tools and applications and advocacy that we need. Maddie, if you'd go to the next slide, please. Next one. I don't know what he wanted on this. I think everyone knows that at the recent COP26, there was a major declaration called the Glasgow Declaration. There were 300 original signatories on this. Launch Partners Center for Responsible Travel, of which I'm the executive director, we were one of those. The Travel Foundation, working with the UN and some other agencies, really spearheaded this. And I think Natalie mentioned before, tourism declares a climate emergency. So many of us have declared emergencies and are developing climate action plans. I want to point out that I expect that Jeremy would have announced this, that tourism declares a climate emergency has just been incorporated into the structure of the Travel Foundation. So the declarations that we all made through Tourism Declares, we will be rolling into the at a higher level with the Glasgow Declaration for Climate Action in Tourism. Maddie, if you would kindly go to the next slide. I think he's got, yeah, and bring those all up. What has been developed and what was very powerful and accepted at the COP26, and Natalie Kidd made note of that Intrepid was there, and I believe John Thornton actually did a signing in Glasgow on that. I think I saw that. But we've identified 5 pathways in the Glasgow Declaration that are going to be very important. Many people in the presentations this morning and this morning from a Western Hemisphere time, and then the second event here today, I've mentioned these, but there are 5 pathways: to measure, and we've heard that metrics so many times, to genuinely decarbonize, to regenerate, and a couple of speakers just in the last 2 sessions have mentioned that, collaborate, not compete, and then to identify key financing mechanisms. Maddie, I don't think he has another slide in here. Let me just, if you just see whether, if you could go to the next one. No, so you can stop sharing. So I just wanted to underscore that quickly, and we can follow up on that, and you can go to the Future of Tourism website and find that, or go to the Glasgow Declaration as well. But I wanted to share that. Now, we have a few minutes for questions. I really want to thank Kelly, Natalie, and Susanna for their insights on sustainable tourism blueprints and solutions. And we have a few questions here that have been brought up from the Q&A, and I have one. I'm gonna take editorial license, and Natalie, I have a question for you, and I'm gonna put you on the spot a bit. And I know you're quite up to the task at Intrepid. Intrepid is clearly an industry leader, no question about that, and we thank you for that tourism sustainability leadership. And very recently, Intrepid just announced a big growth offering of new tours in the United States. Mm-hmm. And congratulations on that, and thank you for that. But what I want to underscore is, you know, if everyone goes back to the map that Natalie had put up, and this is a really interesting growth for Intrepid, since you've been known for much more of more in the developing world. Now, clearly you've had a portfolio in the US. What my question is, and I'm sure many people will think about this, is we really need help in the United States when it comes to sustainable tourism and really taking a more holistic approach here. How do you think Intrepid, having a bigger market share in the United States and given the leadership position, how can you lead by example, influence the tourism industry, which is a very important destination for international travelers, as well as, of course, an extraordinary domestic tourism, and specifically around two areas. How can Intrepid influence the importance of getting the tourism sector in the United States to decarbonize, genuinely commit to that, and to commit to science-based targets?
Great question. I think in the US, it's similar to what we're trying to do on a global basis. And it's not the first time we've been operating tours in the States. We had a probably bigger footprint in the States a few years ago, and then we, for various business reasons, haven't been quite as active there. But I think with COVID, obviously as a business and trying to look for the business sustainability, we had to pivot to more domestic. And so we looked at our major source markets around the world, and we can probably categorize them into three: North America, UK, Europe, and Australia Pacific. So part of it was looking initially from a business perspective of how do we keep something going during this time when we've lost all revenue. However, in everything we do, as I stated, we do try and put this sustainability or purpose-led lens to it. And we actually feel that getting more people traveling locally, and I think COVID gave us that opportunity of people having to look in their own backyards, it is helpful in terms of when people go on holiday, not every holiday is a long distance holiday with the associated emissions. So when we realized a few months ago, international tourism is back on, we made the very conscious decision that we still wanted to progress with having a greater local travel offering for those larger source markets. So how do we start making an impact? And I think the more connected we are, through all the different sustainable organizations out there, it really is about collaborating, making contacts, sharing what we know. And I think for businesses, showing them that this is not a cost to the business that they can't afford. It's actually a competitive advantage. I think educating not just the industry and other businesses, but helping to educate the consumer and the customer. We firmly believe that customers are becoming better educated, are wanting to make good choices with who they're spending their money with. And I don't think it can be entirely consumer-led. I think businesses need to kind of push in this direction, but I think that combination between engaging consumers, educating consumers in how they can make good choices, and then probably showing the industry some leadership and engaging collaboratively. And you made the point in Jeremy's presentation about it's collaboration, not competition anymore when it comes down to this. But I think the thing we can do as a business is show other businesses that actually this can be good for your business and for your bottom line, as well as being putting in good practices. So they're not exclusive, they're really supportive of each other. So, I think we really look forward to, we're growing our team in North America, we're growing our links in North America, and hopefully through a combination of those things, we can help.
Thanks, Natalie. Kelly and Suzanne, I don't know whether you have any other insight or perspective on that you'd like to share before I shift to another question that will be for you all.
I was just going to add that we are seeing, even at the state level, state tourism organizations move from destination marketing to destination management, and in the United States. And so some really good examples of taking a step back and seeing how to best prepare visitors to these national parks and protected areas. I know Utah's taking a lead on that. And also looking at ways to inform local tourists and how can they better visit our public lands and our protected areas. So I see we're seeing a shift in the US, at least here in the West, in that direction, which is quite positive.
Terrific. Suzanne, I don't know whether you had anything you wanted to add. I just want to make sure everybody has a chance to.
Just emphasizing something that Natalie already said. I think the COVID, the pandemic also give us the opportunity to see more local, right? More locally, and also to put value on our protected areas and visiting the protected areas. And for example, in Ecuador, we saw that. So people had a lot of time going to the national parks when they were open again. After a few months they were closed, but also was putting the value on that and trying to make an awareness and a strong awareness of what is having this local-based tourism and this opportunity that you just have near you. So, and that I think made a big shift in general in the minds of as residents being tourists near your place, right? So I think that was a very interesting thing that happened.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. A question for all of you. National parks, both in the US and globally, how do you feel, this is a global question, how are they actually addressing and incorporating climate change into their management plans? Are there any particular winners or leaders that you're seeing in this? Maybe Kelly, I'll direct this to you first, and Susanna, and come back to Natalie.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from the national park perspective what they see themselves doing, but we are seeing greater collaboration between concessioners and park service or park land managers, and working together on sustainability goals and waste reduction and things of that nature. So I do see sort of a shift in how maybe the Park Service has viewed concessioners in the past. We recently did a study up in adjacent to Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park, and there seems to be more cooperation and partnership building around these topics of sustainability, and assuming that transportation issues is one of those greater issues with respect to climate.
And I want to point out to everybody that the chat is kind of lighting up right now with a number of examples, and as Anna had mentioned before, and we have throughout both sessions, both events, that we will be collecting all of this content and providing you these as resources. I think we have time for maybe one more really quick question, and some governments, this is from one of our different participants, some governments, examples, France, Spain, and Italy, are competing to increase their number of visitors. How will they accept kind of retracting or reducing those in order to reach COP26 objectives? Don't know whether anyone would like to tackle that.
Who wants
Doesn't
to
have to be those countries. Natalie, sure.
Well, I think it is a tricky one, but I think for me it comes back to this piece of collaboration, and I think collaborating between governments, business, and then whether it's the not-for-profits or academia, kind of balancing out. Governments need to support the economic livelihood of their country. You can understand why they need to do that. But I think it's also starting to take a longer term view that just pushing for bigger numbers and focusing on the bottom line for today and the income to a country and a destination for today is actually selling out our future. But I think we really need to see that collaboration between government and private sector. And I think private sector has a big role to play in working with government. And we certainly lobby governments where we've got a more major footprint. And we are constantly lobbying governments and trying to have engagement with them. And I think that's key.
That's a
Greg,
great point.
can-
Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
can I
I
just
just realized
add
I'm getting the hook.
Well, I know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just can't help but mention, I was just at a conference and we heard from a lot of public land managers, protected area managers. And in our country, the word climate couldn't even be mentioned in interpretive programs up until the last administration change. So we do have to look at the politics of place and the impact on,
No question.
our protected area managers, especially here. So just needed to throw that out there.
Absolutely. Well, I wish we had more time, and that's even after this is our 6th hour in 2 sessions today, and well, carried over into the next morning in Asia and Africa. But I want to thank everyone. We're going to officially close the crisis response and recovery, nature-based tourism, biodiversity, and livelihoods. On behalf of IUCN Tapas, World Wildlife Fund, Arizona State University, and the Center for Responsible Travel, we really do appreciate everyone's attention and commitment to all of our wonderful speakers. And I have to make a just very heartfelt and hearty shout out to both Alex and Maddie behind the scenes that have just been seamless in putting together. It's really hard across literally every time zone and what have you, and they've just done an outstanding job. So I'd like to thank on behalf of all my colleagues, everyone who has participated, prompting questions, engaging with us today. You all will receive an email which will have follow-up materials and resources from the sessions today. All of this was also recorded, and that content will be available. We hope that this event inspired you and has provided you with some new tools and perspectives, as well as hopefully some new contacts and colleagues that you'll work towards in the future, so that we can work towards change for the better and to commit to a much more holistic approach to sustainable tourism. So on behalf of all of us here in this community, thank you. We wish you well. Stay safe and healthy. And thank you so much for all the work that you do, public, private sector, nonprofit, to make this a better world. Together, we will be able to, and I'll use the comment that Natalie had just shared in terms of just how important collaboration is for us to move together, whether it's as researchers, practitioners, decision makers, et cetera. So thank you, and have a good day, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. So we'll close things now. And on behalf of Anna Spenceley and myself as our final, and Kelly Bricker and Jim Sano, we're the band of merry men and women who put our heads together on this. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, good day. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.